Unit 3. Activities for Everyone. This presentation is aimed at anyone who'll be running a reading group or helping students to use the school library, or anyone teaching literacy and reading skills. This may be a student, teacher, parent, or volunteer. The activities and worksheets will be useful to all schools and all teachers of Nepali and English, not only in the context of library reading groups. The aims of the presentation are to explain how to use the Library Nepal worksheets included in this unit, to provide advice and suggestions of how to use and adapt these sheets to suit your needs, to instill confidence and provide inspiration so that group leaders feel empowered to make the best use of their library sessions. We recommend that you watch the whole presentation before your session. You could also revisit the relevant slides prior to leading each session to remind yourself of key information. The first 2 slides of this presentation explain how to use the Library Nepal worksheets and give general suggestions about how to adapt them to suit your students. If you have already listened to this part of the presentation in another unit, you can skip ahead to Worksheet 1, Your Favourite Story, although it may be useful to listen again. Unit 3 provides a range of activities suitable for all groups. The activities have been designed so that they can be adapted for use with learners of all ages and abilities, and suggestions have been given for how to do this. If an activity does not seem suitable for your group, just miss it out and go to the next one, or think about how you could do it differently. The activities are about different types of stories, poetry, and descriptive writing. This presentation will give you an overview of each worksheet, with a list of necessary equipment and helpful tips for some activities. The activities in this unit cover a range of skills, including group reading, discussion, writing, creating, and researching. They include working independently, in pairs, and as a group. These activities are signposted by the icons that you can see on screen. The icons indicate the suggested way for using the activity, but this is not necessarily the only way. Most of the activities can be adapted in any way that you choose. For example, writing activities can be done as speaking activities if you don't have writing materials. Pair work can be done as a whole group. Whole group discussions can be done in pairs. The icons are there as guidance, so think about what will work best in your own situation and feel free to be creative. The star icons are particularly important, as they mark out helpful tips that will support you when leading the sessions. How to use the worksheets. The activities for each unit are displayed on a one-sided worksheet. Where possible, print out some copies of the worksheet to share around the group. However, don't worry if this is not possible. Instead, you could display the worksheet on screen if you have access to a computer. Display the worksheet on a mobile phone and show the students. Write up the activities on a large chalkboard or whiteboard. Look at the worksheet before the session and make a note of the activities you can do with your reading group. Or you could simply read through the worksheets yourself to get some good ideas for inventing your own learning activities with your class or reading group. You don't have to print things out or even have the activities on screen in the library. If resources are scarce, any of the writing or drawing activities can be done as group discussion activities instead. Students can tell stories rather than writing them down, or describe what they would draw. The activities are flexible and can be adapted to suit the availability of resources in your library or school. Remember, you can download all of the resources at any time and store them on any device, a computer, a local network, or your own phone, by going to www.library-nepal.com. Additionally, remember that all the resources are free of copyright, so you can copy any of the ideas, pictures and activities in resources that you might want to create yourself. The aim of Library Nepal is to inspire you to exploit your library to the full so that you can inspire others. Worksheet number 1. Your favourite story. In this session, the reading group members will talk about their favourite stories, design book covers, and persuade others to want to read or find the stories too. For this session, the only equipment the students need is something to write or draw on. For example, some paper, a chalkboard, or a whiteboard. If this isn't possible, the writing and drawing activities can be done as group discussions instead. Activity 1 is a group activity in which each student shares the name of a favourite story and states one reason why he or she likes it. You should encourage everybody to say something, but don't force students who don't want to speak to join in. You could go first to get the group started. If anyone is struggling to think of a story, you could suggest one or provide an example of a well-known story instead. Activity 2 is a creative activity in which students design a book cover for their favourite story. If you don't have pencils or paper available, the students could work in pairs and describe what their book covers would look like instead. You could show the group some examples of book covers from the library to help them to get started. If you need to, look back at your Reading Champion Toolkit before you do this activity to remind yourself of the names of the different parts of a book so that you can direct the students confidently. In Activity 3, the students imagine that they are selling their favourite book or story in the market. You should think about what they would say to a customer to make them want to buy it, and present their ideas to the group as a speech. You could talk about what makes a good speech first, and encourage the students to make their speech as exciting as possible. As in Activity 1, don't force students to speak if they don't want to. As an alternative, the students could write the speech together as a group, and then you could present it. Activity 4 is another speaking activity. This time, the students take turns to tell a small part of a story that everyone knows. The story doesn't have to be from the library. It could be a folk story or a story about gods and goddesses. Decide how long each student should speak for, so that everyone gets a chance to join in. For example, you could ask everyone to say 2 sentences. Worksheet number 2. Types of story. In this session, the reading group will talk about different types of story, find different types of story in the library, and make up new stories. For this session, the only equipment the students need is something to write on. For example, some paper, a chalkboard, or a whiteboard. If this isn't possible, the writing activities can be done as group discussions instead. Activity 1 is a group activity in which the students try to name as many types of story as they can. There are many different types of story. For example, stories about gods or goddesses, history, nature, people, or animals. Make a list or keep count of how many the students think of. In Activity 2, the students work in pairs to find one book that fits into each type of story that they thought of in Activity 1. If there isn't much space where you meet, you could ask the group to sit in a circle and place a selection of books in the middle where everyone can see instead. If you have more space, you could make this activity into a competition and see which pair can find them all first. In Activity 3, the students look at fables. Fables are a type of story that teach the reader lessons about life and how to behave. The characters are sometimes animals. Working as a group, the students make up their own fable and explain what the lesson is. To help the group understand what a fable is, try to think of an example that everyone will know and share it, or use the example given on the worksheet. In Activity 4, the students work in small groups to make up their own stories. Each group should choose a particular type of story to write. You should make sure that each group has a mixture of students with different skills and abilities. If any group is struggling, they could look at the covers of books in the library to get ideas. When each group has created their story, they could write it down, tell it to the rest of the group, or even act it out as a play. Let each group choose the option that they are most comfortable with. Worksheet number 3. Poetry and Description. In this session, the reading group will think about the feelings and descriptions in poems and make up new poems and creative descriptions. For this session, the only equipment the students need is something to write on. For example, some paper, a chalkboard, or a whiteboard. If this isn't possible, they can do the writing activities as group discussions instead. In Activity 1, the students work in pairs. They choose a poem from the library to read together, and then decide whether the poem contains emotions or descriptions. They could use their voices to show the emotions or descriptions in the poem. Before this activity, make sure everybody knows what an emotion and a description are. An emotion is a feeling. A description is a picture of something in words. If some of the students are still learning to read, you could read or recite a poem out loud to them one line at a time and ask them to repeat it after you instead. Activity 2 is a group activity. Together, students should choose a broad topic, for example, summer, water, or friends. Each student would then say one word that links to that topic. You should write down or remember these words. Then, as a group, the students will make up a poem that uses all of the words. You could make this activity more challenging by asking the students to choose their words as quickly as possible. If you have a watch or timer, you could set a time limit. If the students struggle to think of any words, use the prompt questions on the worksheet to help them. In Activity 3, the students practice using descriptive words by choosing a picture from a book in the library and taking it in turns to describe an object in that picture. For example, a tree, a bird, or a house. Each student takes it in turn to say a word. Write these words down if you can, and see how many of the group can think of. When the students have completed this activity, they can either use all the words to write a vivid description, or use some of the words to make up a poem about the object. You could also try this activity using an object from the school or something you can see outside. In Activity 4, the students write or narrate a description based on a picture from a book. They use their imaginations to include details about what they can see, hear, smell, and touch in that picture. If some students are still learning to read, select one picture book and ask each of them to choose a picture from it. At the end of this activity, read the story aloud to the group. You may find it useful to revisit the relevant slides of this presentation before running your sessions. Remember that the activities are all suggestions, and you should feel empowered to adapt them to suit your students and circumstances. We wish you every success with setting up your school reading programme following our suggestions and materials. All of our worksheets are available for download at www.library-nepal.com. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact us on info@librarynepal.com.